Hi Python programmers. We've talked about lists, and with a list we have a variable name and then we can associate that variable name with multiple values, and each individual value can be accessed using an index. So if we want the first item, we remember 0 is the index for the first item instead of 1, so we get that item from the list. And if we want another item from the list, we change our index and we get the next item in the list. Well, today we're going to talk about another data type that's very, very similar to lists, but it's called tuples. I've seen it pronounced as tuples and tuples, but what I've seen most often is tuples, kind of like you'd pronounce Tuesday or the beginning of the word Tuesday. So here I've got a tuple, and I start with a variable name, and instead of a square bracket that I would use to define a list, I'm going to use parentheses. Other than that, it looks identical to our list. And we can grab out the individual items from the tuple using the square brackets just like we would the list. So if I want the second item in the tuple, I'll use that 1. The third item, I'll use the 2, etc. So far, just like a list, I can see what's the length of my list. What's the length of my tuple? We could even do splicing with lists or tuples. We could do max or min with tuples. So what's the max of my list? What's the max of my tuple? And I'll do a quick slicing example. So if I've got my list and I want to pull out everything from the first item through the third one, but stopping before I get to the third one, I can use the splicing syntax. Let me remind myself what my list actually was. And this said start at the beginning and go until you get to index 3. So this is index 0, 1, 2, and then it stopped before it got to number 5. So that was splicing. And I could do the same thing with my tuple. Let me remind myself that the tuple has the same numbers as the list had in it. So if I want to splice, I could use the square brackets. And this time, instead of starting at the beginning, why don't we start at the second number and pull out index 1 and 2. So we can splice, we can use a lot of those functions like max and min and length, but the big difference is a tuple is immutable. It means it can't be changed. With my list, if I want to change the first item in the list, I can just use an assignment statement and say, well, the first item is now 99. And I've changed my list. If I try to do that with a tuple, I'm going to get an error message saying, oops, this type doesn't support assignment, so you can't change the tuples. And you might think, why would Python make a data type that's almost the same as lists, only kind of less powerful because you can't change things inside of it? And the reason is that when it comes to another data type called dictionaries, you look something up by a key and you find a key value pair in the dictionary. Keys to dictionaries can't be mutable, so a tuple can be used as a key to a dictionary, but a list can't. So that's pretty much why they came up with lists. Let's talk about another data type, and that's sets. So I'm going to create a set with a bunch of even numbers in it. So even numbers 2, 4, 6, and let's say I even type in the same numbers a few times. So there's more than one 6, there's more than one 4, more than one 2. But sets, to create a set, it's going to kind of look like the tuple and the list syntax together, only we're going to actually have to say the word set. And then parentheses, square brackets, and these are the items that I want to put in my set. Well, a set, it turns out, removes duplicates. So my result is I've got a bunch of even numbers, but it removes duplicates, and also the order is not important. So even though I typed in 2 first, 2 is not the first thing that prints out when I'm looking at my set. The order is not guaranteed. So let's try another example. So I've got another set, and I use the word set and parentheses and square brackets, and this time I'm just going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so now I've got two sets. Well, the reason that they created sets is they wanted to mimic mathematical sets. And so something you might do in math class, if you have two sets, is you might want to find out where they intersect. What numbers are in common between the first set and the second set. And you can do that in Python with an ampersand. So you can say, what's in common between my set and another set? And we can see, well, they both have 2 and they both have 4. And we see that is definitely in both of those sets. We could also, with mathematics and sets, we might look at the union between two sets. And in Python, we could do that with a vertical bar there, an OR. So what's in this first set, or it's in the second set, either one, and we want both of them. They just have to appear in one set. And so now we get all of the numbers that would appear in one or the other or both. So we get 1 all the way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. Those are all the numbers that occur in one set or the other or both. We could also do something called the symmetric difference, and that is done with a caret. And what a symmetric difference is in sets is something that is in one set or the other, but not both. So if I looked at my beginning set, it had a bunch of even numbers, and my other set had just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm looking for things that don't appear in both places. And the even numbers 2 and 4 appeared in both sets, so those will not appear in my symmetric difference, but all the other numbers do because they just occur in one set. So I made this little comparison chart between sets and tuples and lists, and let's see if I can get that on the video. So they are a lot alike, but there are some differences. So if you're creating a list or a tuple or a set, they don't have to be all integers or all strings or all floating point numbers. They could be a combination. So if I'm creating a list, I do it with square brackets. Creating a tuple, I do it with parentheses. Creating a set, you have to actually use the word set and then parentheses and square brackets. So we could create a tuple, a set, and a list all with 3 items, and the 3 items are 1, 2, and 0.75. How do we refer to an individual item in a list or a tuple or set? Well, in the list and the tuple, it's the same. We just use a square bracket, say, give me the first item. And in both cases, it'll give you that number 1. But you can't do that in the set because sets are unordered, and there isn't really a first item in the set. You can see whether or not something's in a set with the word in, but you can't specify a certain order. What about changing something, modifying an element? Well, you can do it in a list. You can say change my first item in the list to 2. This is not allowed in tuples because they're immutable. They can't be changed. It's also not allowed in sets because they're unordered. So there isn't a first item in the set. Adding an element to the list. You can append, or you can insert something in a certain place inside of that list. In tuples, they're immutable, so no appending or adding of elements is allowed. But you can add things to the set, and you can do that with just an add function. Finding the length, it's the same in all 3 data types, just len for length. What about removing items? Well, you can use remove to remove the item with the index 4. You can delete this item from the list and then either put the string of or the integer or whatever you want to delete, or you can index that the 0th element. But tuples, they're immutable, so no removing elements is allowed. You can remove things from the set. So this would remove the number 4 from the set. We don't know what order it's in because it's unordered, but if there's a 4 in there, it's not going to be there after you remove it. So that is a summary of lists, tuples, and sets.